Shark fans, and welcome to the Shark Channel. I'm Jacob, and I'm here to show people the true colors of sharks. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Dara Orbach, a cetacean or whales, dolphins, and porpoises biologist and assistant professor at Texas A&M University at Corpus Christi. So, Dr. Orbach, how are you?
Today is a beautiful day. I'm sitting in my university office now, and right behind this computer is a window where I can see the ocean just a few feet away, so I can't complain.
What's life like near the ocean? Like, you're able to see the ocean from your house. Like, that's incredible. So, what's life like near the ocean?
For me, I am from Toronto, much like Jacob, and I moved away for university. I moved towards the coast, and since then, I decided that I want a job that will keep me always by the ocean, that I'm my happiest when I can see the water. I'm very fortunate that from my work office, I can see the ocean. I live 2 blocks from the ocean, so I'm able to walk around sunset most days, and this is where I'm my happiest. So all the challenges that life throws at you seem a little bit more easier to deal with when you can just go out and smell that salty water or the salt in the air and hear the waves crashing. It just gives you a lot more perspective on things.
Wow, you are an amazing cetacean biologist. But when did it all start? Like, when did you become interested in marine biology?
So I actually did not grow up knowing that I wanted to research dolphins and whales and porpoises. That actually came with my desire to live by the ocean. For university, I went to University of British Columbia on the west coast of Canada and just really enjoyed the lifestyle there and found it was a really good balance of people who enjoyed being outside and were very conscientious of the ecosystem and just were happy because they could go surfing between work business meetings. And I decided this was a lifestyle I wanted for me. But I didn't know that one typically needs to volunteer for many years to get into the field of working with dolphins and whales. And so I didn't think I would get into a master's program right away studying dolphins. And I took a very circuitous route, which was intended to eventually get me where I am now. So instead, I studied bats and I studied echolocation in bats and became proficient at analyzing acoustics, with the idea being that this is a transferable skill set and something that I could then apply towards cetaceans or dolphins, whales, and porpoises. And that's exactly what I did. I learned how to study echolocation in bats, and that's a skill set that I have used since when studying dolphins and whales, although that's not my main area of expertise.
Uh-huh. That's really interesting. I know that bats and dolphins are both mammals. Can you maybe tell us some more about the connections between the two?
I think that was the main connection between them, that they are pretty much the only mammals that echolocate. There are some other mammals that do too, but they're not as common that we know of. We also know that some birds echolocate, but our main 2 taxa or groups of animals that consistently use echolocation or biosonar are the bats and the cetaceans, the toothed whales in particular. So that was something I saw as a way to transfer and become an expert, and that would get me into the field of working with dolphins. I'd have a very desirable skill set. And that's something that I often tell students and others who are interested in pursuing this career, that every experience you have is something that you can use to market yourself as something applicable. So really think in terms of how you can take something you learned from one experience and apply it to a completely different experience. And it's the things that make you different, which make you an asset, as opposed to conforming to what everyone else knows how to do already.
Oh, wow, that is very wise and very interesting. What cetaceans do you work the most with? Like toothed whales, dolphins, porpoises?
I work a lot with bottlenose dolphins in the water. So with live animals, it's mostly bottlenose dolphins when I'm in the US. That's the most common species. I also am very fortunate to spend time in New Zealand working with dusky dolphins. And I just found out this morning that we've been granted permission to go back to New Zealand to do a really, really exciting project. So I'm excited about that. And then I also work with dead animals with their reproductive tissues, and I look across all cetacean species. Just the other day, I was also working with some sea otter reproductive tracts, manatee reproductive tracts, seals, sea lions, so not just cetaceans, but any marine mammal species. But in terms of the live ones, definitely dusky dolphins, bottlenose dolphins, and actually harbor porpoises as well. I'm fortunate to study them in San Francisco by standing on the Golden Gate Bridge and looking down at high tide.
Oh wow, that must have been really nice. Can you name maybe one thing that you learned from your research about maybe bottlenose dolphins? Because I love bottlenose dolphins too.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm interested with bottlenose dolphins is just how they are affected by humans. And where I'm based in Corpus Christi is this amazing location because no one has studied dolphins here, or I should say, no one's published research on dolphins here in 30 years. So any question you can come up with is pretty much unknown. And one of my students was matching some photos of fins. And so we take photos of the fins on their back, the dorsal fins, and each one is individually distinctive. So when these dolphins are born, they have beautiful, clean fins with no markings, but over time, they get markings mostly from other dolphins, but also from predators like sharks and orcas, from humans. They can get them from fishing gear, from getting chopped up by propellers. They can get them from birds, all kinds of sources of where they get these markings. And where I'm based now, we have two stable populations of dolphins, we believe. And what's unusual is that Corpus Christi, from where I'm based in South Texas, all the way down to Mexico, is the only hypersaline lagoon in America. So the water is saltier than regular seawater. And we know that if, for example, you were to get a cut in your mouth or a canker sore, your relatives might say you should wash out your mouth or swish around salt water. And we know that the Dead Sea, for example, helps to heal wounds, that salt helps to heal, but we have no idea if this is true in marine animals, which always live in a salty environment. And so my student took photos of dolphins in the very salty water and in the normal saltiness of water. And it does appear with our preliminary data that dolphins in salty water, that their wounds disappear quicker. Their scars, their wounds heal faster, essentially. So that's pretty exciting in terms of understanding how reliable this technique of studying dolphins is, taking photos, and also understanding how widespread and prevalent this idea of salt healing wounds is.
Uh-huh. What was the coolest experience that you've had with an animal? Because I know you've had a lot. So what was the coolest one?
Oh my gosh, I am very lucky that I've had countless amazing experiences, but definitely one that always sticks out of my mind was we were in Kaikoura, New Zealand, which is my field site there, and we had heard there were orcas in the area. And so we got out on the boat and we were searching for this orcas, and we were on the radio with other boats in the area. And there was someone with the Department of Conservation not very far away from us, and we radioed them and said, "Where is it?" They said, "It should be right around where you are." And the next thing we know, these two huge killer whales, these orcas, popped up right beside their boat. The fin of the adult male was above the height that we were, and they took this breath and they went back down. And this photograph or this image was captured by the researcher, the government official on the other boat. And these killer whales are dolphins, but they're less than 2 feet away from us. And it was the most breathtaking and scary, exhilarating moment at the same time.
Oh wow, I've heard killer whale dorsal fins grow huge lengths, like more than a meter sometimes.
Absolutely, especially the males. So it's thought that the males have larger fins than females. So this is called sexual dimorphism, a difference between the sexes. And it's possible that females evaluate males and how sexy they are based on the size of their dorsal fins, the fins on their back.
Oh wow, that's really interesting actually. I know dolphins, porpoises, whales, especially toothed whales, have been around for a really, really long time, like millions of years. Can you tell us maybe more about how whales evolved or early whales? Because I'm very interested in that.
Sure. So the closest relative to whales, do you know what it is?
Bats, maybe?
It actually is the hippo. So dolphins, whales, porpoises are really closely related to even-toed ungulates, which include hippos and cows and pigs and sheep and alpaca. So their closest terrestrial relatives are animals that we see today that initially were on land, and they slowly transitioned to water because that was a way to feed on fish. It was a different niche that hadn't been exploited yet. So we know there's an amazing fossil record of the evolution of whales over time. And a lot of it has to do with periods of glaciation. So changes in terms of major ecosystem changes is when we see these radiations and these widespread spreading of whales. And there's very punctuated periods in the evolutionary time frame of when new attributes evolve. So when does echolocation evolve at a very specific time? Having teeth versus having baleen. So we know there's two different types of whales, toothed whales and baleen whales. There was a very punctuated place in which that evolved as well. So it's really exciting to study their bones and learn more about their history. That's not my expertise, though.
As you know, I'm very interested in sharks, and there are a lot of misconceptions that people have about sharks, like they're man-eaters. Can you maybe name for us some misconceptions that people have about whales and what the answer would be to those questions?
Yeah, a lot of people think that dolphins are happy because they're smiling. And that is something that has to do with their anatomy, that it looks like they're often smiling. But the way I kind of describe it is a dead dolphin is also still smiling. So people think that dolphins are happy just because of the shape of their jaw. So that's one thing. People also might think that dolphins are really friendly. And we have to keep in mind that wild animals always pose a potential risk to people. If I see a dog walking down the street, even on a leash, I don't know if this dog has tendencies to attack or not. So I always approach animals, besides for my own pet, with caution. And I think that people should need to be respectful that animals, we can startle them and they might have adverse reactions where they try to escape or where they can be aggressive if we startle them. So we just need to be really respectful of animals and not assume that they're always friendly or there to play with you. They might just be there to eat and you're observing them.
That's really interesting. I've also heard recently that dolphins have the most intelligent brains of any animal other than a human, which probably has a lot to do with their hunting strategies because they're smart. So, could you please tell us a little bit more about the methods that they use for hunting?
So it really depends on the species. I'll back up for a second and say that intelligence is a really complex issue because how do you measure intelligence? For example, is it realistic for a dolphin to know how to do an algebra question? Probably not. And the way I think about it is that there are tribes of people in certain parts of Africa who probably don't know how to do geometry, but they would be able to forage and use resources much more effectively than we could in our urbanized society. So intelligence is really tricky to study. And one way this is done in animals is actually by looking at the anatomy, by looking at how much folding there is in the brain or the relative brain size to body size. So besides for humans and some primates like chimpanzees, we do believe that certain species of dolphins are the next most intelligent animals. In terms of how they forage, there is a huge variety of different tactics that they use. We know that in one population in Australia, in Western Australia, the bottlenose dolphins there have at least 25 different tactics they use. They sometimes put sponges on their nose and use those to dig around and knock food out. We know that some whales, like humpback whales, will form bubble nets where they'll make big bubbles. And think about when you're in the water, as you blow bubbles, those rise as they go to the surface. So what the whales will do is they'll blow bubbles deep below while they're swimming in a circle, and those bubbles are going to rise. And as they're going up, they're forming a whole curtain or a whole wall around their prey, which are now trapped in the middle. And then they can swim through the middle and feed on them. So each species seems to have some really specialized ways to feed. And we see that it differs across different habitats. So there's more than one place in the world where we know that bottlenose dolphins will actually do something called strand feeding, where they will chase their fish onto land and then slide back in with the tides, which is extremely dangerous because they might end up stuck on the land if they can't get back into the water. But there are several populations that do this. We also know there's some populations of orcas in Argentina that do something similar as well. So it seems that a lot of these foraging tactics are a combination of evolutionary history, but also potentially there's some culture involved. And what's special about our marine mammals, especially cetaceans, is they're one of the few groups of animals where we believe there is cultural transmission, where you have fads that come in and out of style, and you might have one individual teaching another individual something else as well.
You know a lot about killer whales. I've heard recently that killer whales are cultural in a way, and some pods will hunt differently than other pods so that they're different than the other pods. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So there are three different ecotypes. Well, there's the killer whales, which we usually think of in the the North Pacific. So that's going to be around Alaska and Western Canada and Washington State. And then there's the group of killer whales we think of generally inhabiting Antarctica. So they have different terms that we call them, but there's 3 different ecotypes. So one of them is called residents, and those are the fish-eating killer whales. And those tend to reside stationary in one basic vicinity. And then we have the transient killer whales, which are moving from area to area. And those are the ones that typically eat other mammals and birds. And then the third type is a type we know the least about. They're called the offshore ecotype. And we believe they actually eat sharks.
I have seen footage of that. It's crazy. I wanted to know something about the killer whales. They hunt in pods, right? So, are there any killer whales that maybe don't hunt in pods?
So it depends on what they're feeding upon. And there actually have been studies which show that there is an optimum group size to hunt. For example, if you're going to try to take down a large gray whale or a large sperm whale, that is a big animal and it takes a lot of collective effort. So there are papers which have showed that for the transient killer whales, the optimal group size is 3 animals. And if you're in a larger group, it's not worth it in terms of the amount of resources you get, the amount of sharing, it's just not worth it. And in a smaller group, the amount of effort you put in is just not worth it. So there's all kinds of ecological models about trying to understand why dolphins, especially orcas in this case, why they hunt in certain size pods. And we do see that the predictions match what we would predict based on different variables.
That's very interesting. I heard recently from Oceana's website that North Atlantic right whales at this point are very, very endangered. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that and how we can help them?
Yes. So this is the most endangered mammal that I know of on the planet is the vaquita, which is the Gulf of California porpoise. It's found in Mexican waters, very close to California, and there's less than 10 individuals left in the entire world. And so that's a species that is highly likely to go extinct within the next few years, which is really, really sad. And unfortunately, we didn't get our act together fast enough to save them. So there's concerns now that these right whales could also be going endangered very soon because the population has been declining. And I was very fortunate. I was not fortunate these whales were dying, but when there was a mass die-off a few years ago, I was living in Eastern Canada and was involved in several of those dissections, which was a fascinating experience. And a lot of these animals were dying because they were being hit by ships. So they had broken bones showing that these large ships, huge container vessels, which are not maneuverable, would hit the whales, and the whales, which are also not the most maneuverable, either wouldn't detect the ships or they wouldn't move out of the way in time. And so what's amazing is that the government of Canada responded by changing the shipping lanes. So when you look at the ocean, you think it just is open ocean. There's no barriers. You just go straight. You can go any way you want. But there actually are maps that people are following when they are navigating through the water. And if you're a container ship, there's very specific imaginary lines that you're meant to be following, just like if you were driving on a road and you see those lines as well. And so what the government did is they said, this is where the whales are now migrating or moving. We need to change our shipping routes so we're less likely to hit them. And that's exactly what the government did. And it seemed like there were less ship strikes that year. And then based on some aerial surveys that both the American and Canadian government were involved in, they did find some newborn babies. So the really big concern is that if you have a population which is declining, and let's say one year there are so many deaths that 10% of the population or so, I don't think it was quite that high, but it was close to there, a lot of the animals died. But more importantly, the animals that were dying were the adult females who could have new offspring. So if you lose those females who are sexually mature, and we know they only have their babies every few years, that means the population is probably not going to recover very quickly. So it's really been a priority for much of the northeastern coast to try to save these North Atlantic right whales.
That's very sad. Is there anything that we can do maybe in quarantine, maybe less garbage or something that we can do to help them?
I think a big thing has to do with garbage, as you mentioned. So some of the animals we're seeing dead, it does have to do with ship strikes. But a lot of the time, these animals have massive amounts of garbage inside their stomach. They're eating plastic. They confuse Plastic, single-use disposable bags get confused all the time with jellyfish. Even microplastics, which are very tiny, like tiny little parabens inside your soaps, those land up in the ocean as well. And it's a bioaccumulation effect. So those tiny little things might land up in fish, and then the whales eat the fish. And so it slowly builds up and up to the point that the loads are so high that these animals can die from them, or they have so much plastic inside their gut that it's preventing them from getting the nutrition they need. So being conscientious, making sure that you reduce your use of single-use plastics, that you recycle, respecting animals from a distance. These are all really valuable things that we can do to help.
I think that's really important for all of us. Thank you so much, Dr. Orbach, for sharing your thoughts with us. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please leave a comment below and also subscribe. I'm Jacob Astroff signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next one.